All right, we will get started in just under a minute. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to Coping When Distracting No Longer Works. This webinar is brought to you by EFR, Employee and Family Resources. My name is Lars Peterson, and I'm going to share just a bit about my background before we start, so you have some context for the stories I tell or the examples I use. Also, if you have questions, you can use the raise the hand icon, and at the end, I'll answer as many questions as possible. So, in terms of my work, I currently work with EFR in a number of ways, including counseling clients, also webinars and other presentations. Nowadays, webinars only. In addition, I have a private practice in West Des Moines. I see individuals and couples, variety of issues. Coping is definitely one of those issues that comes up a lot. I've been in private practice about 5 years. Before that, I worked as a family business consultant. I worked in sales and management, mediation and restorative justice. So a wide number of things. The examples that I'm going to share today are the stories with clients are going to be stories in which I either change details or keep it very, very broad. And so you would not be able to recognize one of these people that I use as an example if they walked up on the street and started talking to you. But I think it is helpful to have stories or examples just because it helps, oftentimes it helps people identify better with what I'm saying. So with that, we will go ahead and just jump right in. Today's objectives, pretty simple. Gain a greater understanding of the factors that lead to distraction and why it can be unworkable in terms of a person's values or goals or really where they want to be in life. We'll talk about how effective coping differs from distraction. And then one of my most important goals is to provide you with some tools. So some ways to look at effective coping and have some things that you can walk away and use the minute you leave the webinar. What I don't want to have happen is 6 months later, you know, people are thinking like, wow, yeah, I saw that one webinar on coping and distracting. There was some good stuff in there, and then not remember it. So I think it's important to give you some tools that you can actually start using. So it's a VUCA world. I don't know if you've ever heard this term or not. It came about in 1987. It's obviously an acronym, and very, very true true today. Volatility, you know, earlier this year, our world in a lot of ways was turned upside down. So, and there's still volatility in what's going to happen, how's this going to play out, which kind of blends into the next one, uncertainty. When will we return to normal? What will normal be like? What is the new normal? Will someone I know get COVID? Will I? So just a lot of uncertainty in our world right now, and that can be very stressful. And we'll talk about how that can lead to distraction in a few moments. Definitely financial and work uncertainty for many. I had a client today, and it seems like the week before I'm going to do a webinar or presentation, I must really be attuned to clients' stories in terms of that presentation, or somehow they're coming to me with things that apply. But just this morning, I was talking to somebody with a great deal of uncertainty about job and finances and all of that because of COVID. So very common. Also, it's common even have a family member who's a dermatologist who thought that she, if nothing else, she had a pretty stable, certain career. Okay, things weren't going to likely change much. This was January, February. Last month and she's not in Iowa. Last month, this clinic was down about 90% in revenue, and it's changed her picture dramatically. So uncertainty, complexity, not only with figuring out how we should respond to keep ourselves safe, keep other ones safe, and how far should we go, and how, where is that line? But also the complexity of working at home. In the last webinar I did, there were a lot of questions around how do I, juggle all this? I've got kids at home, I've got work, it's just a lot of complexity right now. And ambiguity is also part of it, just figuring out what all this means. So it's definitely a VUCA world. If I would have done this presentation 6 months ago, I probably would have left this slide out. I use it in other presentations a lot, but this especially pertains these days. So why do we distract? I'm gonna go over this model relatively quickly and keep it pretty simple, but I think it's, at least my clients find it extremely helpful to get just a picture or a model of why we do some of the things we do. So this model would say that built into us, we have 3 different systems that organize our world and that help us regulate emotions. The first system is the threat system, and that's all about detecting and responding to threat. So someone's driving in your lane, all of a sudden they swerve into your lane. Even if you're really smart and you have a great brain, you don't start thinking, well, I wonder why they're doing that. Are they texting? Maybe they're eating. Immediately, all this adrenaline and cortisol courses through your system and you react. Okay, better safe than sorry. That's the threat system. We'll talk about this in the next slide a little bit, but the problem is when there's a threat that continues, or when maybe we've had trauma in the past or difficult things in the past, that threat system can get stuck on. And we can always feel a certain sense of unease, a little bit of feeling unsafe. So threat system's all about fight, flight, freeze, anxiety, anger, fear, even disgust is a threat emotion. So that's the threat system. The drive system, upper left in blue, that's all about acquiring, okay? We're not 8 feet tall, we can't fly, we don't have claws, and we're not the fastest, runners. So we have a drive system built into us that motivates us to go out and get food, clothing, shelter, to keep the species going, procreation, all those kinds of things. This built-in drive system. And then the third system we have that helps us make sense out of things is the soothing system. Easiest way to see the soothing system is look at a baby, and not a baby with a lot of colic, but a baby that can be soothed relatively easy. See that baby crying and see a mom or dad soothing it, and very quickly that baby just calms. I have a number of clients, and I'm a dog lover. You'll see a dog in the next slide, not mine, but a number of clients that report that dogs, and also cats and other pets, can be very soothing, can kind of bring us down. So both the drive and threat systems are very much go, go, go. The soothing system is let's rejuvenate, relax, recharge, okay? Threat and drive can get very much blended together. Threat drive, I had a client this morning, again, when we were talking about this, on the outside, it would seem that he's very much in that drive system a lot, but he's in that drive system because he feels a sense of threat. So there's people nowadays feeling a sense of threat, and they're going into drive and really stocking up. Their basement is full of toilet paper and all kinds of things because that drive system kicked in because they were feeling a sense of threat. So there's a lot more we could talk about here, but I just wanted to lay that basic groundwork as a way to kind of look at how we operate as humans and have that as kind of a foundation. So, cute little dog here. Let's say a Great Dane or another large dog or just an aggressive dog comes into his yard and scares it, okay? So depending on the dog, sometimes little dogs have big barks, so maybe it would even bark at this dog. But if this dog's big enough and menacing enough, this dog, it'd be flight. Fight, flight, freeze, it'd be flight, okay? Now the difference between animals without our big brains and us is that this dog, 15 minutes later, most likely is sleeping, maybe chewing on a bone, maybe playing, but not ruminating about what happened. You or I feel a sense of threat. someone threatened us, we can be thinking about that for 3 days, 30 days, 30 years. I have clients that still have a sense of threat in their bodies over something that happened a long time ago. And sometimes what happens is that overthinking keeps that threat going. So for example, if we just talk about this very simply, old brain, that's the fight, flight, freeze, procreation, all those kinds of drives, and new brain, the thinking brain. Really, if you think about it for just a moment, all it takes is one thought, and we can go from that content area to a sense of threat. Just one thought that's strong enough, and we can be there. So overthinking can be a real problem, or news, listening to news and feeling a sense of threat. So before I go on, I'm just going to pause just for 5 seconds or so and let you take a second to think about in your own life right now, how often do you have a sense of anxiety, even if it's just a little bit, unease, agitation? How often do you feel just truly content? And how often do you feel that you're achieving and in drive and you're in the flow and getting things done and it feels good? Just take a second to think about that. Okay, so there's definitely some stressors or if you want to call them threats, which they really are, associated with COVID. Isolation and loneliness. I hear that from a lot of my clients. It's interesting. I have a number of clients who would describe themselves as introverts and very self-contained, and they tell me that's really not much different for them, and they're doing okay. But that's not the bulk of what I hear. For some of those same people, it's even worse because they're already pretty good at being isolating themselves, and now even more so. There was a 2020 survey by Cigna, a large insurance company, before COVID, so it was very early in the year, over 10,000 people, and 60%, 3 out of 5 people, reported being lonely. So this is a big deal. That's up 7% from just 2018, so significantly. Obviously, a stressor / threat is concern about getting sick, ourselves or our family. Financial work stress. Much of my session today, one of my sessions today, was about just that very thing. This person's in the hospitality industry, has some underlying health conditions. They're going to be reopening, and what does she do? How does she do that? And if she doesn't go back to work, in her case, she'll most likely lose unemployment, and just lots going on with that whole financial work stress piece. Relationship stress, close quarters, right? Not telling anyone anything new there. Can be a source of comfort and also a strengthening as well, but oftentimes there's a lot of stress. Negative news, hearing news that conflicts with other news can be stressful. Boredom, we'll talk about one of my clients in a bit that really struggled with that. A lack of routine and structure, feeling like it's Groundhog Day, just every day is the same. And it can be a stressor when the distraction strategies that we normally use are not available or they're reduced. So that can be a stressor. So I really like this slide. I think it's really on target because it is so easy to use technology in the form of our phone, oftentimes, to distract. It's very powerful. I was meeting with a client recently, and he talked about how he's got everything on his phone. He's got Snapchat. He doesn't text much. He's a young adult, very young adult, and doesn't text much. But he's got everything on his phone he needs, the documents he needs for work, just everything he needs, which also means it's very easy for him to get distracted and go down rabbit holes with social media and other things. What he said to me was, if I don't look at it, the phone, every so many hours, I'll miss out, which is interesting. He also said, my parents had cigarettes, I have my phone. So just an interesting kind of take on that for him. So lots of ways to distract. Before I click on those ways, I'm going to give you just a moment to think about different ways you distract yourself. When difficult feelings come up, difficult thoughts, you're overthinking, there's just something you want to avoid, how do you distract yourself? Well, here are some ways. Social media, buying stuff, checking news feeds, research on COVID, or my personal favorite, since I love to bike, is finding that perfect bike. Doing the research, hours and hours and hours, many more hours than I need. Cleaning, when things are already clean. Watching shows and movies, binge watching. Eating, then eating some more. That's another thing I hear with my clients and see in my own life, is it's just so easy to do right now. Drinking alcohol or some other substance in a way to distract. And sleep. So maybe some of you came up with other ways. That's definitely not a definitive list, but there's lots of ways we can distract ourselves. So let's talk for a minute about effective coping and really how that is different. My very simple definition is just working skillfully with the current challenges and stressors I'm facing. So skillfully. That might be experiencing meaning and purpose. It might be changing what I can, accepting what I can't. One of those concepts that's simple, but not easy. Building capacities, skills, learning, evolving, growing. Enhancing life, mine and others. And the research is pretty clear that the more we're focused on helping others, the happier we become. There's benefits in helping others beyond that, the help they get, that it helps us feel better. So effective coping, that'd be a very simple definition. And for the rest of the presentation, we'll really explore some ways to do that. So hopefully give you some tools moving forward now. So one really helpful question to ask yourself that I use a lot, some variation of this with my clients. When I look back on this time of uncertainty and change, what do I want to say about how I met the challenges? So a lot of times with my clients, I'll ask them if they're in a really difficult spot, 5 years from now, looking back, what would you like to say about how you handled this, or how you handled yourself in this? Okay. So really getting clear about that whole meaning and purpose. How can I derive meaning and purpose out of this? What do I want to say? There's a lot, as we'll see in the next slide, a lot we can't change, but there are certain things we can. And what would I like to be able to say about how I handled it? I'm guessing that there would be maybe no one in the entire audience that wants to say, looking back on this, well, I binge watched more shows and movies than ever in my life before. Pretty sure no one's going to say that as something that they want to do. It's something that's happening for sure. Another way to look at this is, are there some opportunities within my situation? So can I do a digital reset? Change passwords, just take some time to do that. Maybe unsubscribe from newsletters. That's been something that I've really been focused on. My challenge is that I tend to subscribe to a new newsletter that, pretty much cancels out the one I unsubscribe from. So I never quite get those down as much as I'd like to simplify. Start and finish home projects. I'm guessing right now from people I've talked to, clients and otherwise, that there's more projects that have been done around the house or in the yard in the last couple months than in any 2-month period in the last however many years. So it can be a time to do that. Strengthen relationships. So yes, close quarters can make relationships hard. Are there ways that I can use this situation to strengthen relationships? And we'll actually be having a couple webinars that address relationships coming up. Starting and continuing exercise. So I've heard from a number of my clients about the value of exercise, and there's strong research that for depression and also anxiety, exercise is a really well-tested, well-researched, and good way to address both depression and anxiety. I've heard from a number of my clients, my gym closed, or I don't have much equipment at home. And once we explore that a little bit further, though, they realize that there's hundreds, thousands of apps and YouTube tutorials and gyms that have put their workouts online that take either very little equipment or body weight. My guess would be right now, body weight exercise as a Google search term is a ways up there. Undertake a learning project, online library, Coursera. If you're not familiar with Coursera, it's spelled out there. They have a lot of online courses that are either pretty inexpensive or free. So there's lots of ways to do that. Practice self-care and self-reflection. Elizabeth Gilbert, who's an author, she wrote Eat, Pray, Love and The Signature of All Things, some pretty well-known novels. She talks about this time being, instead of quarantine, a retreat. So where she can go deeper. Start a yoga or meditation routine and eat healthier. So I talked to a client this week who talked about and they've had some trauma in the past, about how beneficial yoga has been, that she always feels so good after. It's just hard for her to do it, to get started. So, simple concept, as I said before, not easy. Really being able to look at, okay, I can't control the actions of others. I can't control if other people social distance, or the amount of toilet paper at the store. I can't control any of those things. What can I control? Finding fun things to do at home, limiting social media. So you can see in that slide, there's a number of things, and these are very distinct circles in a lot of ways, although there is some overlap, as we'll see in the next slide. So really getting good at redirecting yourself when you're stuck in the, well, why don't they, or this is crazy, why doesn't this, or this should happen. Okay, can't control that. What can I do? Can be an excellent coping mechanism. Again, simple concept, but not easy. So this is exercise I sometimes lead clients through. What can I change? You saw some of the things on that last slide you can change. Cannot change, toilet paper, when does this end, all those kinds of things. Not sure. So not sure, an example, a non-COVID example is, I'm not sure if I can change my relationship with one of my wife's family members. Now, maybe not. There's some things I can try. Not sure if that's going to matter. Okay, that would be the not sure. But sometimes just getting things down on paper and out of our head onto the paper can be really helpful, just to get it out of our head so we can let it go and know we can come back to it. Using screen time skillfully. So there's ways to use screen time mindlessly, just on automatic pilot, scrolling through news feeds, or just checking social media 3-4 times an hour, whatever it is for you. But we can also use video chat. I know someone in her 50s who was meeting high school friends once a year, so that's pretty cool to keep that connection going that long in person. But now that can't happen, so now they're meeting once a month via video chat. Okay, so no, it's not the same, but it's also 12 times as much. Culture, there's all kinds of tours you can take these days of zoos and national parks, museums and art galleries. Education, we touched on Coursera, YouTube tutorials. My wife and I just recently took apart part of a dryer and put it back together again, courtesy of YouTube. Really didn't think we could get a repairman out right now, and it wasn't anything super major. So we took apart part of the dryer, put it back together again. Couldn't have done that without a YouTube tutorial. So there's lots of ways to learn right now and to do. Online workouts, again, you name it. If you put a search term in, you'll find it. Using screen time skillfully, relaxation versus avoidance. So it's one thing to binge watch. It's another thing to watch 1 or 2 of the programs you really like and then move on. News, yeah, but okay, how much do I really need to be informed? Yes, I do need to be informed. And I'm not one of the people that says never watch the news, eliminate the news apps from your phone, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that's a good way to go. We there is a threat. We want to be apprised of how this threat is playing out. But many of us, including me at times, spend way too much time learning things that aren't helpful. Routine and schedules. This would be the number one thing I hear that's causing issues with my clients as far as COVID and being at home. So, this is when I do all these different things. And I bet, I haven't sat down to do the math, but 1 out of 3 or 4 clients I work with talk about this being an issue in some form. One client I'm working with right now is a business owner, and his particular business is not the type where he has to work 8 or 10 hours focused per day. He's at the point in his life where he can work 4 or 5 hours really focused and do really well, do what he needs to do. The problem is he's the main caregiver right now for his kids during the day. I wouldn't say the problem, this is a challenge because he likes it. The challenge is, though, that up until about a week ago, there was no schedule or routine. So he would start working, one of his kids would need something, he would stop working. He would start working again, get into it a little ways, and it's fairly complex stuff. Somebody needs something, he'd get called out again, okay? So all we did is simply help him come up with a routine to time block, to put a 4-hour block of time in his day where this is when I work. And his kids know that, his wife knows that, everyone knows that. If there's something major going on, sure, he'll step out. And what he said, and he just implemented this, but he said after just a week that his anxiety has gone down, he's gotten much more productive, and his kids have also benefited from this schedule. And they're a little bit older, so they're not 3 or 4. So this is one, again, simple concept, hard to do oftentimes, especially if you have multiple kids and you're juggling different schedules, maybe even have parents you're trying to check in on. But to have some kind of routine or schedule can be really helpful in terms of coping with this. So, from threat to soothing. So from the red circle to the green circle. The ways to soothe ourselves, mindfulness, which I'll talk about in just a moment, self-talk, reassuring, deep breathing, support and care for others, music, walks in nature, knitting. There's lots of ways to take ourselves from that threat system into the soothing content system. And sometimes it takes a lot of practice. And depending on how much threat is there, it's harder. So mindfulness, again, a simple definition that I use a lot is just paying attention to the present moment with curiosity and openness. Your body's present, but is your mind. So you're really present right in the moment. Simple, again, simple, not easy. Mindfulness and soothing practices. One thing I use with clients a lot, it may sound kind of hokey when I say it. It would be less hokey if we actually could do it, if you were in my office or we were doing telehealth. Coming into the senses. Sometimes I lead clients through when they're especially agitated. Find 5 things, find something red, find something white, find something blue in your room, find something square, find a circular object, whatever. Could be any 5 things you can see, 3 things you can hear, and 5 body things. Feel your back touching the chair, feel your feet on the floor, feel your breath. And one client out of, I don't know, well over 100 clients that I've taught this to has said, well, that wasn't very helpful. So it's not magic, but it can bring us into the present moment and slow the mind down from that kind of swirling that goes on. Deep breathing, research shows if we exhale for twice as long as we inhale, that tells the body, oh, no threat, we're okay. Mindfulness of sounds or breath, mindful movement, and just mindfulness of daily activities, meaning that whatever you're doing, you're fully doing it. This one is vastly underrated. The clients I work with and in my own life, I find that that's really helpful to keep kind of training myself to come back to what I'm doing. I'm not doing 3 things at once. My mind isn't over here while my body's here, but I'm fully doing what I'm doing. If I'm brushing up my teeth, I'm feeling the bristles, I'm tasting the water in the toothpaste, I'm hearing the water. So I'm really there. It can be applied to eating, can be applied to walking, really about anything. So as we get ready to wrap up and take a couple questions, lessons from Afghanistan. This is from a person, I read this just on Sunday. I'm not going to try to pronounce her name. She's a political scientist. She's a professor, specializes in Afghanistan. So for most of us, our current situation pales in comparison to what people in Afghanistan have had to, or Syria had to go through. So I'm not trying to make a comparison, and that's not helpful anyway, but she says some very interesting things that I think could be helpful to us. And that is, in both Afghanistan and Syria, people refocus their energy from individual survival to that of the community, forming bonds of cooperation and mutual support. And those are beginning to emerge in places like New York and other places. I think we see that in the Des Moines area or throughout Iowa. You adapt and you innovate and you suffer. So there is suffering, but you also create new forms of taking care of others and taking care of yourself. My wife and I just drove by a friend's house whose 3-year-old was having, or I'm sorry, this was a different friend, 8-year-old was having a birthday party. And there was a line of cars with happy birthday and honking horns and all of that because she couldn't have a birthday party for her son. So there's lots of ways that people are doing this. Ziggy usually has good advice, or at least insight into things. Basically, everything is subject to change without notice. That's definitely something that we've relearned if we forgot it. So just a little bit about the benefits that you get. You and your family members have access to 24-hour phone support. This says in-person counseling sessions. Telehealth is available now, and EFR is providing a large amount of telehealth to people, and also financial consultation, legal, elder care, child care, identity theft, life coaching. So a lot of things that people don't realize are available within the EAP. And with that, we will take some questions. And I think Johanna from EFR is going to help with that process.
Yeah, so if anyone has a question or even something that you want to share that's maybe been something you found to be helpful, please use the raise hand function. And as those come in, I will do my best to keep up and monitor them. And we will do a little Q&A with Lars. So I will just take a moment here for people to think about what they may want to share or what questions they may have, and then we will do a Q&A. All right, we have someone saying that they're struggling with feeling exhausted from staying sane, being mindful and coping effectively. Any advice for making this feel like less work?
Oh, wow, that's interesting. I might have to know a little bit more context to answer it fully, but one thing that comes to mind is practicing mindfulness of things that you savor, that are pleasant. So maybe it's, if you really like drinking coffee in the morning, really practicing being mindful of the smell of the coffee, the taste of the coffee, the feel of the mug in your hand. So it's not just about being mindful of difficult emotions when they arise and not getting carried away from them, or mindful of difficult thoughts and trying to refocus yourself back to whatever you're doing. It's also that sense and savoring those things that do bring you some joy. So that can take some work out of it. And the only other thing that comes to mind just off the top right now is just maybe not trying so hard. Sometimes people try really hard to avoid some of the difficult feelings that are there, but just allowing whatever is there to be there, even though it's difficult.
Thanks, Lars. Another one we have is, if you could start with just one mindfulness activity during this time, what would you recommend?
Mindfulness of sounds is one that people usually really connect to. And you can if you're out in nature, great. If not, there's obviously a lot of YouTube or other ways to get nature sounds or other sounds, or it could just be the sounds in wherever you are. But mindfulness of sounds is a really good one. What you don't want to do with mindfulness practices, especially if there's some trauma or some really distressing things in the background, you don't want to close your eyes and go inside and stay with your breath for 30 minutes at a time. That's not helpful. So anything that's more sensory, like sounds, just even walking mindfully, really feeling your feet. And there's lots of tutorials. It maybe sounds dumb to some of you, but mindful walking is actually something that's been practiced for thousands of years. So it'd be easy to find a tutorial on that. Yoga would be another way. Anything that gets you into your body.
Thanks, Lars. This person says, I'm working from home and now homeschooling 2 kids. I find it hard to mentally disconnect from work. I have PTO to take, but feel like there is a lot of things to accomplish. Any tips to find the right balance or even how to disconnect mentally?
Wow. Yeah, that as we talked about that routine schedule and juggling, that comes up over and over and over again. So I do have a couple of ideas. I don't want to imply that these are easy, because depending on your situation, there could be a lot of complexity involved, and it's not easy. You might have to do some experimentation. One thing that some of my clients find helpful is actually change their clothes. It may sound stupid, but change their clothes when they're done with work. Okay, now I'm done with work. Now I'm doing this. Just any kind of a ritual that lets your body and your body mind know, okay, moving on to this now, so it doesn't just blend in from one thing to another. Time blocking can be really helpful, where you set certain amounts of time for this, and then once that time's over, the timer goes off, you're now doing this, so something else. So really any way that makes sense for you to create separation, symbolically even, again, through the way you dress or the way you structure things. Yeah, and what I'm hearing within that question is there, or at least reading between the lines, there may be a sense of threat, like if I don't get all these things at work done, that might not be so good. And so just again, really gaining awareness of what's driving us right now. Is it a sense of threat? And then how can I best respond to that? I'm sorry.
All right, the next one says, I have used a lot of the distraction forms you noted to deal with trauma from a few years ago. However, I've struggled to translate the distraction acts into actually coping and finding resolution and dealing with that trauma. Recommendations on how to transform distraction into coping strategies.
Ooh, that's a really good question. Again, without knowing a little bit more context, but the first thing that comes to mind is, if you're not currently working with a therapist, to consider giving EFR a call and having someone help guide you through that process. And the reason I say that is our coping mechanisms are there for a reason. A lot of times they're, especially when there's trauma, they're there to shield us from really difficult thoughts and feelings and things maybe that in some ways it doesn't feel like we're ready to address. So it's one thing to change from distraction to coping when there isn't underlying trauma. It's another thing to do that on your own. And so I would say just getting some kind of a help or to help you through that process, to make sure that you're supported in that process.
All right, thank you, Lars. Our next one is, I spend my daytime reassuring and supporting my work team and much of my evenings reassuring and supporting my kids and family. I'm exhausted at the end of the day. How can I help them all without wearing myself down?
Wow, that's an easy question to answer, huh? Wow, that's a hard one. That's a lot. I guess, if we were working together, I might try to find out what's leading you to get worn down. Is it the amount of time spent in the reassuring? Is it what's behind the reassuring, like your worry and fear about what's going to happen if you don't play that role. Part of it might be to see if there's a way to transfer some of the responsibility for that reassuring to self-reassuring in your team or family members. So really trying to get an idea of the function or the purpose of that reassuring, and see if there's some ways to either lessen the emotional involvement you have in it. I know obviously you care about these people and that's why you're doing it, but either or transfer some of that responsibility to those people in your life so that you don't feel like you're responsible for all of it.
Thanks, Lars. The next one says, mindfulness and exercise were a large part of my life before, but lately it's becoming a struggle because I'm losing interest in these activities since we've been stuck. So mindfulness and exercise were a large part of life, but lately it's becoming a struggle and there's lost interest since we've been stuck. Any advice or suggestions?
I guess it would be to identify what's different. So was it that you were exercising with people before, now you're not? Was it that you were doing a variety of things that you really liked, maybe at the gym with equipment, and now you can't? Just really identifying what's different about this, and then seeing if there's any way to recreate some of that, either through kind of Zoom workouts where you're doing it with other people, or social distancing walks or runs, or again, not knowing more about the particulars, it's a little hard to say, but really trying to identify what's different and how can I recreate some of that. And with exercising right now, just making it as easy as possible. The example I use when I'm working with people who want to eat healthier is, if the brownies are upstairs and the cut up fruits and vegetables, the brownies are upstairs, the cut up fruits and vegetables are downstairs, what are you going to eat? You're going to do what's easy. So if there's any way at all to make exercise easier and more likely to happen, either with an exercise buddy or with having all your exercise clothes laid out ahead of time and you have to pretty much walk right by them to get where you're going, just anything to make it easier.
And that appears to be all of our questions that we have received for the day, and we are right at our time. So I want to thank everyone who submitted a question. I think oftentimes those are some of the best learning opportunities, because when one person has a question about something, I think oftentimes, many people have that same question, or I think it helps people feel like they're not alone. We're struggling with very common experiences. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and a big thank you to Lars. Before I turn it back over to him just to sign off, I want to remind everyone that we are hosting webinars every Wednesday. The next one will be Wednesday, May 6th, and that is at 10 a.m. I will actually be facilitating it. It's on general mental health and ideas for enhancing your mental and emotional well-being. So I hope you can join me for that. If you go to www.efr.org, at the top of the website, you will see a red banner and it says click here for COVID-19 information. If you click there, you will arrive at a page that has all sorts of resources, and it will also allow you to watch these webinars that we've been doing every week and to sign up for future webinars. So I'll turn this back over to Lars, but thank you and hope to have you in my webinar next week.
All right, thanks, Joanna. And thank you everyone for coming. Again, it's my wish that you take one idea, two ideas from this, if anything resonated with you, and implement it today. So that 6 months from now, you're not kind of wondering what good stuff, what was that again? So thanks again, everyone.